Okay, the resurgence of Sufism within the Persian Empire began during the Zand dynasty and persisted throughout the Qajar period. As noted by Zarrinkub, the Qajar era was marked by a sense of longing for a noble and illustrious past. Naturally, the mystical philosophy that emerged during this time had to align with theological expectation of Shiite society. At the forefront of this Sufi revival were the Neʿmatollāhi and the Zahabis, two prominent orders that shared several core principles. Both placed a strong emphasis on adherence of Islamic law and tenets of Shiite doctrine. They were widely recognized as key transmitter of Akbarian philosophy in Persia. Despite facing scrutiny and opposition from Shiite clerics, these Sufi orders strove to maintain their presence and practices. In addition to these major groups, there were also limited efforts by other orders such as the Naqshbandis, Qadiris, Khaksars, and itinerant dervishes. However, these groups did not wield the same level of influence as Neʿmatollāhis and Zahabis, particularly since speculative Sufism, Tasawwuf Nazari, found its strongest expression within the latter two. Neʿmatollāhi Sufi order is one of the most famous Shiite Sufi order in Persia, whose followers were the most active mystic in the field of speculative Sufism. And from the time of its eponym, Shah Neʿmatollāhi Wali, who passed away on 1431, they were known as propagator of the school of Ibn Arabi or Akbarian philosophy. And during Qajar era, the second inquisition of Sufis in Shiite Persia, whose champion was Agha Muhammad Ali Behbahani, took place, and many of the Neʿmatollāhi Sufi masters were martyred for their mystical beliefs. For the survival of this order, many of the Neʿmatollāhi Sufi masters defended their beliefs through Shiite interpretation of Ibn Arabi, using writing of Shiite mystic scholars to defend their beliefs, which eventually led to the writing of apologetic treatises. These apologetic treatises created a Shiite Sufi identity. During the Qajar era, many Neʿmatollāhi Sufi masters belonged to the class of Shiite seminary scholars, ulama, and being from this class of religious scholars was not only reflected in their apologetic treatises, but it also gave them the privilege to develop their own jurisprudential views and opinions in certain cases, and these jurisprudential views played an important role in the formation of their religious identity, because in many cases their views were novel and therefore became part of their practices either during their lifetime or even continued among their followers after they passed away. This paper will investigate some of the jurisprudential views and opinions of one of the branches of Neʿmatollāhi Sufi order known as Gonabadi or Sultan Ali Shahi order. I will examine masters of this order from late 19th to early 20th century. This era is worth research because after their return from India to Persia, the Ne�matollāhi Sufi masters adopted some usuli methods and expressed their jurisprudential views, which is fundamental among their followers and religious scholars of their time. During the reign of Muhammad Shah Qajar, as Dr. Herman mentioned, the monarchy adopted a comparatively accommodating posture towards Sufi institution, a departure from the more restrictive attitude that had prevailed in certain earlier period. At this time, the Ne�matollāhi order was under the sole leadership of Mirza Zainul Abidin Rahmat Ali Shah Shirazi, whose influence in Fars province and reputation for a spiritual authority facilitated a period of organizational consolidation and expanded public visibility for the order. His death in 1861 precipitated a contentious succession dispute with three prominent Ne�matollāhi figures: Muhammad Kazim Isfahani Saadat Ali Shah, who passed away in 1876, and Haj Agha Muhammad Munawwar Ali Shah and Haj Mirza Hasan Safi Ali Shah. each advancing claims to be the legitimate successor. This contestation not only reflected the personalization of spiritual charisma within the order, but also underscored broader dynamics of authority negotiation in 19th century Iranian Sufism. The dispute ultimately culminated in a formal institution schism, giving rise to three enduring branches: the Neʿmatollāhi Gonabadi Sufi order, the Neʿmatollāhi Munawwar Ali Shahi Sufi order, and the Neʿmatollāhi Safi Ali Shahi Sufi order. The Gonabadi order is generally regarded as adhering more closely to the principles of Sharia than the other two. Although Muhammad Kazim Isfahani Saadat Ali Shah played a pivotal role in the Neʿmatollāhi order's development during the late Qajar era, he was not the eponym of Gonabadi branch. His successor, Mullah Sultan Muhammad Gonabadi, best known by his spiritual title Sultan Ali Shah, became the eponym of Sultan Ali Shahi or Gonabadi order. Trained by some of the most authoritative Shi'ite scholars of his time, Sultan Ali Shah was a polymathetic figure, a philosopher grounded in the Akbarian and Sadrayan tradition under the tutelage of celebrated Qajar-era thinker and philosopher Mullah Hadi Sabzevari, and a master of Persian and Persianate mystical tradition. He also pursued advanced studies in Shiite jurisprudence with leading jurists, eventually formulating his own distinctive integration of legal reasoning and mystical philosophy. This intellectual synthesis not only earned him recognition among Shiite seminarians, but also consolidated his authority as the central doctrinal architect of the Gonabadi order, ensuring its lasting identity and institutional continuity. We now turn on an examination of Gonabadi order's jurisprudential views, which played a pivotal role in shaping the distinctive contour of its mystical identity. In 12-er Shi'ism, Khoms is a mandatory religious levy amounting to 1/5 of certain categories of surplus income and specific types of gain, such as war booty, minerals, and unspent earning after annual expenses. Within 12er Shi jurisprudence, Khoms is conventionally divided into two equal shares: the Sahm Imam, allocated to the Imam of the age, and the Sahm of Sadat, reserved for impoverished, orphaned, or stranded descendant of Prophet, Sayyids. In dominant contemporary interpretation exemplified by Said Ali Sistani, the obligatory precaution Ihtiyat Wajib stipulates that the Sahm Imam must be transferred to the most learned marja or an authoritative representative, wakil, or institution holding formal ijaza, permission to collect on the marja's behalf, with expenditure restricted to purpose sanctioned by the marja. By contrast, Sultan Ali Shah Gonabadi advanced a distinctive jurisprudential view within the Gonabadi Sufi order, referring to Khoms as Oshriya, literally 1/10. Although the term Oshr traditionally denotes a fifth on agriculture produce, in Gonabadi usage, it served as an alternative culture for the Khoms obligation, reflecting both the order's internal terminology and its reorientation of the levy's distributive principle. Sultan Ali Shah maintained that this religious tax should be divided equally, 1/2 to the Imam, Sahm Imam, and the other to the needy at large, rather than exclusively to the Sayyids. However, given the occultation of the 12 Imam, the portion designated for the Imam of the age is not deemed payable, whereas the portion allocated to the needy remains an obligatory duty. The reconceptualization of Khoms formed part of a broader Gonabadi fiscal ethnic that encompasses Oshr al-Makasib or Oshriya, literally 1/10 of earnings. While Oshr in Islamic law is generally restricted to agriculture yields, and Makasib denotes commercial or occupational gain, the Gonabadi adaptation extended this tier to diverse forms of personal income. Oshriya or Oshr al-Makasib embodied Sultan Ali Shah's attempt to harmonize Sufi spiritual discipline with material responsibility, framing economic contribution as an act of both legal compliance and spiritual purification. In practice, these levies supported charitable works and communal welfare and the institutional activities of the order. Developed in the late Qajar period, the dual fiscal model not only engaged critically with prevailing Usuli legal norms, but also asserted a measure of interpretive and economic autonomy for Gonabadi community at historical moment, when Marja center authority was consolidating the economic and institutional structure of Shi'ism. The Gonabadi master regarded the authority and spiritual status of Imam as surpassing that of both seminary scholars and Sufi sheikhs. Consequently, the order accepted only the portion of the levy designated for the needy, while declining to receive the portion allocated to the Imam. It is noteworthy that this religious levy is collected exclusively from individuals formally initiated into the Gonabadi order. Even close family members who have not undergone initiation are excluded from this payment. Within this framework, the levy functions not only as obligatory financial duty for the adherents, but also as a marker of mystical identity, reinforcing both the spiritual affiliation and communal boundaries of the Gonabadi path. Following a prolonged period of decline in clerical influence between the fall of the Safavid dynasty and the rise of Qajar state, Shi'i jurists re-emerge as powerful actors in Persian society, becoming deeply protective of their religious and socio-political authority. Within this context, alternative jurisprudential positions such as the Gonabadi understanding of Oshriya were perceived as direct challenge to both their doctrinal authority and financial. As a result, prominent clerics consistently rejected the legitimacy of this levy, a stance that has persisted into present. In recent years, Shiite clerics' views were divided into three main groups. The first group declared the collection of Oshriya to be religiously impermissible, haram. The second group rejected it outright on the ground that it lacked any authentic Islamic basis. A further group of scholars argued that Oshriya was historically a fiscal practice of tyrannical regimes such as the Umayyads and Abbasids, and thus alien to the Shi'i tradition. While such attack dealt certain blow to the Gonabadi community, they also provoked a counter-reaction, fostering a heightened sense of solidarity and distinct identity among its adherents. Another jurisprudential stand that further distinguished the Gonabadi order from the Shiite mainstream emerged under the leadership of Mullah Ali Gonabadi, the son and successor of Sultan Ali Shah, who held the spiritual title Nur Ali Shah Zani. During a period when slavery remained a legally and socially accepted institution in Iran, and when numerous Shiite scholars themselves owned slaves, Nur Ali Shah promulgated a general directive to his followers that included an explicit prohibition of the practice. He argued that in light of the moral imperative of Islam and the evolving norm of society, no legitimate justification for slavery persisted, and thus they categorically forbade buying and selling of human beings. As far as the historical records suggest, he was the first, or at least among the earliest Shiite jurists to issue such a ruling. This stance distinguished the Gonabadi order from Shiite mainstream, many of whom continued to accept and practice slavery at that time. During the lifetime of Sultan Ali Shah, the consumption of opium and hashish was gradually becoming widespread in Iran. Among certain adherents of other Sufi orders, these substances were even regarded as part of dervish practice, on the assumption that the sense of oblivion and unconscious produced by narcotics were equivalent to the mystical state of fana fillah, the annihilation in God, which is considered the ultimate aim of Sufi spiritual wayfaring. Furthermore, because the Sufi path placed great emphasis on awaiting divine opening, futuh ghaibi, and mystical visions, kashf wa shuhud, the hallucination induced by opium could easily be mistaken for authentic spiritual experiences. For these reasons, Sultan Ali Shah strictly forbade all of his followers from consuming opium, and in practice refused initiation into the order to anyone addicted to it. In his Quranic commentary, Bayan al-Sa'adah, while interpreting Quran chapter 2, verse 219, which says, "They ask you about wine and gambling. Say in them is great sin and yet some benefit for people, but their sin is greater than their benefit." Sultan Ali Shah explicitly ruled opium to be forbidden. His successor Nur Ali Shah Sani reinforced this prohibition by composing a treatise entitled Zulfaqar on the impermissibility of opium use. Although some members of Gonabadi order were still habitual users during the Sultan Ali Shah's lifetime, over the time they abandoned the practice, and the later leaders of the order categorically refused to admit anyone addicted to opium. This prohibition thus became defining feature of the Gonabadi identity. Another practice strongly emphasized by Sultan Ali Shah was suspension of worldly labor and work from Thursday evening until the Friday noon. He instructed that this period should be devoted primarily to the act of worship, while also underscoring that deeds of beneficiary are themselves a form of worship. Such act included visiting sick, assisting orphans, meeting the friends and fellow members of Gonabadi order, and engaging in any other charitable activity aimed at helping others. Over time, this observance became a formal directive within the order and was incorporated into the distinctive spiritual identity of Gonabadi path. Drawing upon Quran, chapter 9, verse 28, "Indeed, the polytheist mushrikun are impure, and certain related traditions and number of Shiite jurists have regarded the people of the book as mushrik on the account of their anti-Tawheed beliefs, thereby deeming them actually impure, najas. A smaller group of jurists, however, have maintained that the verse explicitly declared only polytheists to be impure, and by implication does not extend this ruling to the non-polytheists. Sultan Ali Shah adopted the latter position, and in his exegesis of Quran, chapter 5, verse 5, which says, "The food of those who were given the book is lawful for you, and your food is lawful for them," he concluded that the people of the book are intrinsically pure, tahir. His successor, Nur Ali Shah Sani, likewise articulated the same view in both his Risale Muhammadiyya and his 9 directive, Dastur al-Amal Nuhgane, continued this tradition, which continued till today among Gonabadis. In conclusion, from the leadership of Sultan Ali Shah to that of Sultan Hussein Tabandeh, known as Reza Ali Shah, who passed away in 1992, the sole master of Gonabadi order were all mujtahids, who, rather than adopting the traditional Sufi attires, wore the garb and turban of Shi'i clerics. This 4th-generation tradition shifted with the succession of Ali Tabandeh, bearing the spiritual title of Mahbub Ali Shah, who became the first sole master of the order in this lineage not to hold the rank of a mujtahid. Nevertheless, the inherited emphasis on the adherence to the Sharia persisted, as Mahbub Ali Shah and his successor continued to stress the centrality of specific jurisprudential positions, as mentioned in here, that had over time became integral to the Tariqa identity of Gonabadi initiates. Thank you.